Callisto Protocol's Final Transmission DLC, much like the base game, was enjoyable for the first segment of my playthrough before becoming a slog that soured the experience. There's some interesting stuff in here, but it manages by the end to undercut the things that make its combat system interesting while failing to innovate in any meaningful way. I'm playing this DLC months after everyone else, and having not played the base game since launch, before a lot of the gameplay patches. So immediately to me it was noticeable how much quicker healing was. The rest felt broadly the same, and I kept on my quality of life accessibility option for auto QTEs to spare me the nonsense of the surprise locker snots, though this time it also solved a puzzle for me in record time and earned me a trophy. But as there are only a handful of those puzzles and they don't look like much more than a pause between combat, hardly the great puzzles of true survival horror, I felt no inclination to turn the option off and bother with them myself. As before, the game's presentation is fantastic. This continues to be a gorgeous looking game whose dark, oppressive corridors and putrid sewers positively drip with atmosphere. If a game was the sum of its graphics and sound design, Callisto Protocol would have been a winner from the start. But the level design in the DLC remains as rigidly linear as the base game, with all the limitations that presented, stalking a succession of corridors, some dark, some on fire, some filled with goop, between fights gets old after a while, and if you add in some of the hallucination scenes that the DLC has to offer, the intrigue of getting turned around from the beaten track is lost in frustration that regaining your bearings is a pain when everything looks largely the same. Early on, this DLC could easily be another mid-game section in the base title. That isn't all bad, as it doesn't take long to get back into the swing of combat, and it is a good system. Once you learn to balance between guns, baton and grip, throwing enemies into spikes or spinning blades, managing the space and dealing damage becomes a lot of fun. Though at other points I decided to forgo that in favour of stocking up on machine gun bullets and treating it like a third-person shooter. Both strategies were fun. Where it ceased to be fun though, ironically enough, was at the introduction of the kinetic hammer. There was a modicum of satisfaction being able to deal damage to robot enemies and to utterly slaughter weaker ones. But soon after that the game decided to just throw hordes of robots at me, none of whom reacted much to gunfire, or could be picked up with the grip, rendering half the combat obsolete. All of a sudden, we were back at the early stages of the base game, slogging through tedious dodge-hit brawl sequences, and hoping for something more interesting. We never got it, the most variety being a sequence with combat and hallucinations, which threatened to be more frustrating than interesting after attacking mirages led to taking damage of real enemies, whilst the game did its best to disorient you. Thankfully, it wasn't a recurring feature. The final boss fight too was a pain. Much on the same level as the final Captain Ferris boss fight of the base game, it just felt drawn out, with no interesting combat and lots of nonsense where the game hurled projectiles at you and did its best to stun lock you. The decision to have pickups hidden on shelves in dark corners so you need high contrast mode to see them was also one that felt like the game was toying with me as a player, and not in a fun or interesting way. As for the story, it's easy once you've experienced it to see why so many found it infuriating at the end. I actually thought that despite leaning heavily on a trope and a cliche, which I won't spoil here, it was a relatively interesting way of approaching more playtime with a character who had supposedly made a heroic sacrifice at the end of the game. With that said though, the concept is better than the execution. As with the occasional moments in the main story where the protagonist has visions of his past and his lost partner, the hallucinations, the questions about reality, and everything else setting up the ending feels more like a concept than a fully fleshed out plot point. We had the chance here to fully explore Jacob Lee's guilt in a way that the main story failed to do, to address his relationship with his partner who died at the start of the story, and afterwards only really appears as a jump scare ghost or to make a plot point more obvious. But rather than do any of that, we just get him asking over and over again what's happening and why, but never engaging in any introspection on the matter. It feels half finished and, as we approach the ending, ham-fisted how this has been dealt with. Like the Callisto Protocol overall, Final Transmission takes a potentially interesting combat system, environment and story setup, only to clobber you over the head with something that starts fun but ends in a slog. Whether what we got was the original intent, or was warped by all the season pass and microtransaction nonsense tacked onto it, it's a disappointment because it's too easy to see what it could have been. Have you played the Callisto Protocol and the Final Transmission DLC? And if so, what did you think of them? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like and consider subscribing to keep up to date with all my content. Like the video that just popped up, which YouTube thinks you should watch next. This is a Patreon and member supported channel, so if you want to become a member and unlock custom badges and emojis, early access to my videos, and your name in the credits, then click the join button below. Thanks very much for watching, and see you next time.